Hello, this is Huey, Norwood. Been asked to talk about leadership. Uh, I'm 65 years old. In 1965, I began my ministry. Um, I started out in my home church as a youth minister with a CA group, which today would be called a youth group. From that little start of that, then I moved in later years to a place of pastoring. How I got into all of this was as a teenager, God called us into the ministry, or called me into the ministry, and that's where I went into youth ministry at. And I did that until while I was in high school, until after I married, and in 1971 I was called to my first church, and the first church that we had was just a small little church in a community of maybe of 200 people maybe, and we had on our roll in the church we had 3 active members, and then there was just a few people that were attending the church but weren't members of the church. And we took the little church and worked with them and pastored them and watched members begin to come into the church, and stayed there for a while until we felt God lead us out of that particular place. And then we moved on to other ministries, and some of the challenges of being a pastor are finding ways to get people to begin to work in your church. A leader has to bring people out of their shell and to lead them into a place where they can begin to lead. Sometimes people think that the pastor is the one that does all this, but he's a leader, but yet he has to develop leadership people to follow him and to listen to the word as he preaches it and as he teaches them, and then they begin to see the need to begin to push themselves out to do more for God. But the challenge is just finding ways to do this. And you do it sometimes by just being one-to-one with them. Sometimes you do it in group settings. But you find a way to encourage them to just step out in faith and believe that they can be useful for the Lord. And it's hard sometimes to do that, but you have to look for a way to do it. And you can't just be the number one person all the time. You got to sort of guide these people that you become acquainted with to the place where they can work and minister along beside you. Some of the rewards of being in leadership is seeing what God does as you go along the way. Seeing people that their lives are being changed. People that have no way of knowing that they could do certain things, but you train them to see the ability to reach out to other people, and you get them to begin to read the Word and study the Word and pray, and find themselves being led of the Spirit of God to move out and bring other people into the church and into a place where their lives can be changed. So the rewards of leadership is looking back and seeing, and even in some of those churches, seeing where that God has really moved in somebody's life and brought them out of a life of hopelessness and despair and sinfulness and worldliness, and with no place to go but down, but you see them as God moves in their lives, and they begin to uh, accept Christ, begin to become part of the plan of God, and God works in their lives and saves them, and you see them, their whole families begin to change, and uh, all the things that God does in their life. And then you see them years later when they're still working and serving God. That's a great reward from the leadership position that God has placed you in. And all of the years of pastoring, you can go back to some of those churches and see some of the kids that were just kids when you were at church, and today they're working in the church or leaders in that church, and that's a reward to see that and see what God has done in their lives. So the reward is more than just things that you could put a value on in this world, but it's more than that. The reward is knowing that you have done something that God called you to do, and that you look back and see some success in it, and you're hoping and you're praying that God's going to keep His hand in your life and direct you to the end until you walk over into the new life with Him. So our lives are what God wants them to be. We have to let Him guide us to that place. And when we're young, we need to be dedicating ourselves to serving Him and following the things that God has told us to do with our lives. So, and this is some thoughts about leadership that we have. So, I hope this helps. Thank you.
The question of how I got into leadership is kind of an hard. The question of how I got into leadership is kind of a hard one to answer because I don't really know. In some ways, it seems like I just kind of fell into that. When you go through life as the daughter of the pastor, a lot of times you're just called on to do things that a lot of people don't even think about, or they don't realize that you're all the time getting asked to do things. I can remember even by the time I was about 14 or so, I was being asked to go substitute in Sunday school classes when people wouldn't be there for the little kids. And so that's probably where the start came from. And again, as the pastor's daughter, you always get asked to help from the people who are in leadership already. I can remember different youth pastors and things like that asking me to help because it seemed like I was the one that was in the loop already or whatever, I guess. But as the years progressed, I somehow got into different positions of leadership, and pretty much it has normally been doing things with kids. There's been a couple of other things probably, but it's normally been doing things with kids. And almost every church I've been in, I have at some point been the kids pastor at that church. Also, you can think of me being in leadership as a teacher. Some people might think of that more as an administrator of the classroom because you have to follow what's already prescribed out for you. But in other ways, you can also think of that the teacher is the one that sets the vision for that classroom. You do have a prescribed thing that you have to follow, but it's up to you to take that and mold it into what your classroom is going to be. So you can think of that as also being a position of leadership as a teacher. I guess the teacher part, the working with kids, I'd always wanted to do it in some form. The going joke around my house was about how when I was young I used to take every one of my dolls and stuffed animals and line them up on my bed, and I had an old chalkboard, stand-up easel chalkboard that my great-great-granddaddy had made me, and I would take that chalkboard, and my other granddaddy drove a bus, and at some point he discovered a teacher's manual left on that bus, and he waited and waited and nobody claimed it, and when nobody claimed it and he was going to throw it away, instead of throwing it away he gave it to me. So I had a 4th grade math teacher's manual and a little chalkboard on an easel, and I would take all those stuffed animals and all those dolls and line them up on my bed, and I would teach those stuffed animals and dolls 4th grade math. That was from the time I can remember doing that in the house that I was living in. I would have only been about 5 years old when I was doing some of that. and I had done it for a long time. But all of that just grew into something more as far as becoming the teacher. And becoming the teacher gave me, I had life experience from church already. By the time I ever became a teacher, I had life experience from church, but the process of becoming the teacher gave me the book knowledge to back up the life experience as well. I think it's a good thing to have both. It's a good thing to have the book knowledge, but we all know that book knowledge isn't always right. So having the life experience and the book knowledge lets you be able to chew all of that up out of the book and spit back out the bones and just take the good stuff and use the good stuff that you know from your life experience and the good things that you've learned from the book. So I don't really know the answer to how I got into leadership. It's just like it was something that was always there that I just kind of fell into. I'm trying to think of when I first became what would be like the kids pastor, and I never really was given that title at that time, but looking back, I mean, that's what it was. It was just a really small church, and at that point, I fell into that position basically because there was nobody else there to do it, and I saw that something needed to be done, and I just started doing it. And I think that's probably something that defines a leader, because everybody else will sit back and say, hey, somebody needs to do that, but the person who is actually a leader can't stand watching that something needs to be done, and they actually won't be able to stop themselves from getting up and doing it if something needs to be done, getting up and organizing it. And now you can edit this out. I'm looking for my next question. So the challenges of leadership is that no matter how much of a leader you are, you never are in complete control, and if you are, that's probably not such a good thing either. But what I mean by that is you're always having to work within somebody else's parameters. Even if you think that you are the top of the ladder, there is still somebody else's parameters that you're having to work within. And a lot of times, somebody else's parameters doesn't match what you think is the best thing to do. So one of the challenges of leadership is trying to discover how to fit what you know needs to be done, how to fit your vision within the parameters that you have to work within. Another challenge of leadership is simply just finding what works. If you're doing things that doesn't work and you are the leader, you're the one setting the vision, it all comes back on you. And so as a leader, that's one of the challenges, is that you're constantly having to reflect. You're constantly having to think about, is this working? Is this idea that we tried, is it really worth it, or should we just scratch it and go on with something else, or do we need to give it a little more time and see if it really is going to work? So that's one of the biggest challenges of leadership, that there's nobody else. It all comes back on you if it's not working. Sure, you can get advice from other people, but as the leader, they know that you're the one making the decisions, even if you're getting advice. And so, like I said, if it doesn't work, everybody knows you're the one that implemented an idea that doesn't work. And not only that, it's your own thoughts on that too. When you look out there and you see that it's not working, you know that you're the one that implemented that idea that's not working. You know that people are wasting their time doing something that you had them implement when their time would be better spent doing something else that actually works. And the rewards of leadership, I mean, that just goes right along with what I just said. The rewards of leadership are those moments. For a teacher, everybody always uses the cliche, when you see the little light bulbs come on in their heads. The rewards of leadership are those moments when you see that what you did actually worked, actually did something. And it doesn't even have to be on a big scale. I've told some stories recently that I just looked back over my life and remembered about little things, about one person at the time. And those rewards are when you can look back and you can say, look at this one person. This worked in their life. And you realize that what you're doing is worth it. And that's the rewards of leadership.